Oh, no. Oh,
We have-
I did that too. Did you tell him? Did he go home? No, it's his car. Oh. So, Sue asked me to remind everyone, I was not here yet, but please use, don't consider some of the smoke wasn't being picked up on our microphone.
There's two settings.
So now is it working?
Yes,
Okay.
okay, but before mine was cat press. Now it is. I think you.
Yeah, you change it.
Yeah, you can change it.
Okay, is it, mine's on now?
Yep.
Okay. So if everybody could just remember to, if you want it always on, well, I don't know what you're doing right now. You just have to press the button. So Greg is coming. Warren, you think you're? Okay. It's getting late. We'll start. as soon as Greg- He was in the parking lot. You said, right? Greg was? Okay, we can give him a minute. And we're-
Hey, how are you?
Ready? Okay, we'll call this meeting to order. When everyone please rise to pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we have roll call, Mr. Marvell?
Here. 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 Mr. Radensky. Here. Mrs. Pusateri.
Here.
Mrs. Tierney.
Here.
Mrs. Brashalski.
Here.
Mrs. Cadman is, or joining us by phone.
Right.
Mrs. Dr. Cadman.
Got it. Okay, Dr. Mann, you're going to give the superintendent report before public comment? Yep.
Thank you, Trustee. Number of issues or topics to go over tonight. I thought I'd list them in advance. Some of these are repeats from our last discussion. And I hope this is a good discussion, maybe some direction as far as possible. As we move ahead, hopefully we're very challenging. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure your mic is working. I can't.
Right. Thank you.
How's that? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. So to begin, this is Teacher Appreciation Week. And I had the opportunity to meet with some teachers out of Clark Summit Elementary before the day started earlier this week. And I asked them, what words could be used to help describe how grateful we are to you for what has been done in the school district all the time, but particularly over the last year. And in typical fashion, they spoke about how great the kids were, how great the support from the parents are, the great challenges that have been faced, completely deflecting any sense that we are so grateful and so indebted to our teachers for their work. And so, absent their assistance, I really don't have very good words that describe the amount of gratitude and the amount of appreciation that I know every single member of this board, our students, and our entire community have for our teachers who have done so well and have worked so hard and who have demonstrated such devotion at a time where it has never been harder to be a teacher. And so as we are now in the middle of Teacher Appreciation Week, I know each and every member of the board and our community support the idea that we are so grateful to our teachers for what they have done.
Agree with that.
And so I want to call to the board's attention. I sent out an email, maybe you saw. We had a very good positive ranking in US News and World Report. Our high school, through the efforts of our high school staff, our teachers, but also K through 12, because people just don't come here in ninth grade. They come here very early on. So this was an award that was really shared by everyone in the district. The criteria that Newsweek, US News uses are college readiness, college curriculum breadth, reading and math proficiency, reading and math performance, underserved student performance, and graduation rate. Now, they're very meaningful categories. Now, in my next two slides, I'm going to do something that I've never done in the course of my time here, is compare two schools. Right? And what I'm going to compare Abington Heights High School to the cyber charter schools where we send so many of our students at such a high cost. And so I listed here, with thanks to the business office for providing the information, some rankings for cyber charter schools. Right? 21st Centuries, where we send some kids, 460 out of 711. Once you get down near the bottom, they don't even give you a rank, they put you in a group. And so Achievement House, Agora, and Commonwealth Academy, and PA Cyber all are somewhere between 518 and 678 out of 711 for rankings in Commonwealth. And the PA Leader Academy is the best of them, 402.
Mike,
Yes.
excuse me, just to clarify this
Yes.
data, because I saw this data and I wasn't quite sure.
Yes,
So the 711 PA schools that you are ranking
Yes.
include these cyber schools?
that is correct. They are included in the rankings.
Because I know there's only 500 school districts,
Right,
and we are still 52, which is less than 10%. It's about 7.3%
Right.
of all the schools in Pennsylvania.
correct. That is correct. And some of for instance, some districts have multiple high schools. So you'd expect more than just the number of districts. And the cyber schools, I'm not talking brick and mortar here now. That's a different discussion.
Right.
These are cyber charters, right? And so I did it, and again, we're not about comparing one to the other, but also these schools are taking our resources, and the idea is that the taxpayers' dollars generate value, all right, for our taxpayers. And any taxpayer can come down here twice a month and ask the board what's going on or confront the superintendent. We can't even, it's very hard to do that with a cyber charter. But I then thought, well, let's look at each of the rankings for the cyber school that takes most of our kids, that's the most enrolled of our schools. And that would be the Commonwealth Charter. Let me get this out. I don't know if people can see. Yeah. So the Commonwealth Connection, right? So as far as ranking goes, Abington Heights High School, to their credit, we need to go higher. Let's be clear about that. But 52 out of 711, we'll take it. Commonwealth Connection, because it's so low in the rankings, is somewhere between 518 and 678 of 711. I'll post this on the site, and you can see I'm not making this up. These links go right to Newsweek at the top. You could click them and see this data. So at Abington Heights High School, 44% of our kids take one AP exam. 3% at Commonwealth Connections take an AP exam. As far as passing, 30% of our kids pass an AP exam. 2% do with Commonwealth. As far as math proficiency, we're at 88, they're at 29%. Reading proficiency, 95% versus 48%. And graduation rate, we're at a very commendable 96%, down to 54% for, and I'll post this so everyone can have these numbers, down to 54% for the graduation rate. And I sincerely hope that if the numbers were switched around, I'd come to this board and say, we should close our doors and send our kids to Commonwealth Connection. I hope I would have the courage to come and tell you that.
Now, where's Commonwealth Connection on the, on the
The
prior?
previous, yeah, they are,
Oh,
they're, yeah,
Commonwealth.
I'm sorry, I should have.
okay, no, that's fine.
So Commonwealth would be somewhere in that batch of, they're too low to actually have a rating.
And Dr. Mann, can
Yes.
you quickly say this year, how much money are we giving the Commonwealth?
And what's up about $1 million, what are we at? I'm sorry.
The total spend for the year on charters and cyber charters will be $2 million, over $2 million. Of that, probably close to half will go to Commonwealth.
How many students go to Commonwealth?
I'd be guessing off the top of my head.
We have about 190 students. So I think it'd be fair to say 85, 90 kids are over at that. We get an exact number for you, Mr. Chairman, but that's just a very rough
Thank you.
yes on my part.
Dr. Mann, do you have any comments on what the reason is that all these schools are so far down the list? Is it just that they're delivering inferior education, or is it a reflection of the kids that are attending the school that are having issues? Do you have
Well,
any insight into that?
Yeah, I'm the first to say, Mr. Azar, anytime we compare ourselves to others, we have an excellent demographic. We have supportive parents that is matched in very few places across the Commonwealth, so we should be high. Right? And the question you asked is a complex one, and that's why I never compare one to the other. But in this case, if there's one thing that has been proven in the last 14 months, is that online education that disconnects students from each other and from their teachers and from their community doesn't work, right? Yet we are forking over just millions now, literally millions of dollars for a model that we know does not work, right? And so I can't really speak to the, but if you look, and those thoughts are borne out by the fact that it's just not one cyber school that's at, they're all.
Yeah, that's what's so
at the
shocking.
bottom,
It's
right?
shocking.
And so again, do they have dedicated professionals? I'm sure they do, right? Do they work hard to serve their students? Unquestionably, that's true. And again, I'm hesitant to speak in these stark terms, but the reality is this is wrong, what is happening to the taxpayers in Abington Heights.
However, Michael,
Yeah.
it's another reason why we need to thank our teachers and our administration, because those numbers are phenomenal.
They're very good. They're very good. Now, the one thing I will say absolutely that Commonwealth does better than Abington Heights is marketing, right? They have
Marketing.
billboards and radio ads and television commercials and everything else. And that's our fight.
Is
That's
it
our
K
fight.
through 12?
Are they okay?
Do they take the same standardized tests?
They do,
And that, so that these results are based on the
yes.
testing?
That
Okay.
is, that's why we can make these comparisons.
We should put that on a billboard.
Well,
And
and-
How much would that
Mr.
cost?
Czar,
It
this is-
probably, if we get one kid back, it'll pay for the billboard.
right, and-
You're
and-
right.
So
Yeah,
my question
yeah.
is, if they're 518 to 678, who is 678 to 711?
Well, we could look that up. too.
I don't want
Mr. Mirabelli says about 123 kids we have at this school. And Mr. Acker, it may be, usually when you get to the way bottom, there are districts and schools that are probably, could be good ones, that just didn't do data. Their data probably, they made errors in data submission, would be my guess for some of them. So again, Mr. Azar, this is as close as I'll ever get to a billboard, but I thought these are words that I did not want to say, but have to be said in light of, what's happening and in the marketing we're facing in the community. I think this is a telling thing. So, but congratulations to our entire district for a good rating on the okay. So that's we had our discussion on that topic. So the prom, okay. Our prom is scheduled. We did decide to schedule a prom, right? We are scheduled for May 27th at Montvale Country Club. We are encouraged because increasing numbers of vaccinated students and reasonable reasonable, right? Not overboard, but reasonable precautions, we think support having a prom. We're grateful to Eric Puzzi, pharmacist, who actually had a dedicated day for our students 16 and up to be vaccinated during the school day. So we had a good response there. However, the level of interest is in doubt among our students for our own prom. After over 1 week of ticket sales, no tickets have been sold. Now, I think that sounds a little worse than it is because students often wait till the end. But on May 14th, we're closing down, right? That's it, the very, very last day. You will not buy a ticket on May 15th. But on May 14th, we'll look at the numbers, and if it's reasonable for us to move forward from just renting the place perspective, we want to have a prom for people who would like to go. But unfortunately, if we find that there is not an uptick in interest, we just may not have a prom. Now, we're planning all kinds of exciting things. We have homecoming, we have great end of the year activities. We hope the prom is part of it, but absent, an increase in interest, which we may see, we're unlikely to have a prom. Again, discussion. Okay, graduation. Graduation is scheduled for June 11th at Comet Stadium. In the past, the board is well aware that we always had to decide whether we were going to be indoors or outdoors because graduation was always fixed on the same day. Well, this year, we really want to have graduation outdoors. So if rain is predicted, we're going to move it to the next day, which would be Saturday, and then the next day, which would be Sunday, which we think is a better option than going indoors. Students will receive 6 tickets each, and we just made this decision as the governor's statement about reopening after the end of May came open, right? However, our current plan is in order to maintain, we're still filling the place with 6 tickets as we always have, but our thought is instead of having, this is Mr. Steiner, I give him great credit for this, instead of having all the students face the home bleachers, we're going to have the students facing the end zone so we could use both sides of the bleachers so that we could have extra space. We could still have lots of people there, but individuals who may be a little uncomfortable or for whatever reason could go to one side or the other and find ways to have that distance. So we think it'll work. We think it'll be a great ceremony. And obviously we're hopeful that we have a great turnout and a great community event on a sunny night. Okay, how's that? Any questions? Okay. Now, this is a tough one, right? This is the modified quarantine that we talked about last time, right? And so we begin by saying we must focus on the safety of our students, but also while adapting to new information as it becomes available. Quarantine of close contact removes individuals who could potentially be asymptomatic spreaders of COVID. So if you're on a bus in near proximity, if you're in school, and many times our seats are within 6 feet, all right? You are determined to be a close contact, and you're asked to be out of school. You can come back at a negative test at 5 days. After 7, you get a negative test at 5 days, and then return at 7, which is down from 10 since the last time that we spoke, right? And quarantine has truly had a negative impact on education and activities that are of high value to our students. I think there are 80 students currently on quarantine in the middle school at this moment. Yes. We ask ourselves, because if modified quarantine is keeping kids from getting sick, then we are all for it, obviously, for sure, right? So the question that we ask is, to what extent has the district significant efforts to identify close contacts and implement quarantines reduced asymptomatic spread or transmission in our buildings? Right, so that is the question, I think. And as we look at this, we have seen transmission among staff members potentially in early December. Staff is not an issue now because all of our staff, or the vast majority, are vaccinated. Transmission between students engaged in non-AHA sports. We've had the leagues, right, have some problems. We've seen a lot of cases from student to student who are siblings or live in the same household. We've seen this occur when students are staying overnight at other friends' homes. We've seen rampant spread among close contacts at parties and out-of-school activities. However, there is little to non-existent spread in school activities, especially during the school day. And we base this on the fact that we've quarantined hundreds, and in fact, approaching thousands of kids. And when they're home, they don't turn positive. So while we're sending them home, we're not preventing an asymptomatic spreader from being in the building. And as of late, this is being confirmed by the fact that they're all coming back with negative tests. And so, it's not just us thinking this up. Ohio has, and these are all links that people can check on. Ohio has evaluated their close contact and have gone to the modified quarantine. Kentucky has done the same. Some districts in Pennsylvania, particularly in Bucks County, have done the same. And since our last discussion, MIT came out with a study, a very, very impressive, well-done study. The link is here. And they said we have to get away from the 6 feet, 15 minutes idea, right? Because 6 feet, 15 minutes might be insufficient in determining who's a close contact and who's getting something. What they say is that the new measure should be cumulative exposure time. And they develop different scenarios, one at a nursing home and one in a typical classroom, right? That defines the cumulative exposure time you can have with an asymptomatic spreader and end up not getting the disease. So the cumulative exposure time, how much you're in the presence of someone with the disease, all right, who's spreading it asymptomatically, how much time do you have before you're at serious risk, right? And they brought up several variables, right? An important variable is the rate of respiration, right? So if you're respirating, you're just out running, or you're very much heavily breathing, that's a very serious factor in considering how close people can be to you for how long. Right? Mask wearing is actually an important thing. Right? Ventilation is an important thing. And what they say is that if you have good ventilation in a classroom, which we do, we have good ventilation. If students are wearing masks and they're not respirating at high levels, as in coming in from a gym class, and that's something that this implies for us to be careful about, right? The cumulative exposure time is greater than a day in school, right? The number of hours. And so this is, again, one data point, but it very much confirms our observations and what we have been reading in many, many other sources, right?
What does that say then for sports?
Well,
Because you're obviously respirating.
you're respirating, but you're outdoors, right?
Okay.
As far as ventilation and that kind of thing. So the key here is, now in a nursing home, all those variables are certainly less favorable. And in their study, again, which I would encourage people to take a glance at, the spread in nursing home is very real, because the cumulative exposure time in a nursing home, based on these criteria, is far less than in a well-ventilated classroom where people are sitting at low levels of respiration wearing masks. So again, this is emerging information that I think, again, supports the idea since our last discussion. So if we were to move to modified quarantine, students must be free of COVID and COVID symptoms. They have to be free of high exposure, living in households that have other siblings, or having been in a party where there's a rampant outbreak. And students must wear masks at all times and remain 6 feet from others while eating, and obviously go through screening to make sure that they're asymptomatic at all times. Now, if we were to adopt modified quarantine, that is in opposition of the CDC guidelines that say, look, you should, if you're at 6 feet for 15 minutes, you should be quarantined from either 14 to 7 days, depending upon the selection. In the Washington Post, I think yesterday, the CDC commented that they're looking at this issue. Right? And I raise it, and again, this is a hard decision for the board to be asked to make. I raise it because number one, we have many students who are out on quarantine, missing time. Right? And I also raise it because we're at the end of the year, where some really big, important activities are coming up in the lives of our students. And it's conceivable, right, given the wrong set of circumstances, that large numbers could be quarantined out of these activities. Now, that's not a reason in and of itself, but coupled with the idea that there's just very strong evidence that the quarantines are not having the effect that it was intended, that is, say, prevent spread, because spread is not occurring anyway. I think the board would be, on solid ground in considering whether to implement a modified quarantine as described. But again, those are my thoughts. It's a hard question.
How
and I
many
leave it
positive cases do we have right now
there. I have
that
to
would
get on.
result in that many people being quarantined?
Well, one case can get you 15, 20, 25 kids. We talk about the bus, the classroom, the sports team. There's no more than 2 positive cases in any of our elementary buildings, and no more than 6 positive cases at any of our larger buildings, the middle school and the high school. So under 20 for sure, positive cases at the moment.
Students that are positive.
Students, right. And we have not seen, since we had vaccinations, we've not seen positive cases among any of our adult staff. But we've not had to quarantine them at
Are
all.
we doing another student vaccination day?
We're in contact with another vendor, and I think Mr. Puzzi is very much interested in coming up now that the ages are lower. And so very much, yes, we would like to have another one with our students. And we think between some of the clinics we held up there, the clinics we held in the building, and the independent efforts of the families to get their children vaccinated, that, and we don't track this, we don't ask, are you vaccinated or not? But we have a sense that growing and substantial numbers of our students at our upper grades are vaccinated at this point.
So why do you suppose that we can't ask about those vaccines, but we do require other vaccines like entering kindergarten? So why is this one not a vaccine that we can't?
I don't know.
Is it-
I don't know. But it's a difficult issue, and a very much a one that brings
Actually,
emotion to people
We
about.
researched this, and they're not following like the HIPAA laws on asking medical questions. Businesses are starting to follow OSHA laws.
Right.
Meaning, if it is detrimental to their business, we can
Right.
ask people to get vaccinated.
Right.
Even to that point. So there's a gray area going on here.
Right.
So I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits against it, but
Right.
still, that's what most in the government are doing right now.
For the exposure, you're still gonna do the 5 negative test, 5 days? and 7? You're gonna keep that,
Yeah,
right?
this has no application to anyone who actually has COVID. We stick with very strictly to all what we've been doing all along.
I think she was saying, but if you were exposed to someone who tested positive, do you require them to have a negative test at some point during the quarantine?
I think I think it's a good idea from a data perspective, particularly because it's free. All right, for us we will still track close contacts. So we're not just stopping that.
Right.
We just won't be excluding them. And then anytime we observe any change that indicates there is transmission in our buildings, well, then we would stop on a dime and adjust.
But why not test the close contacts?
Well, I think.
You're not gonna quarantine.
Yeah. Well, we would encourage them to get a test after 5 days, right? But the family may not wish to do so. And that would be, again, something for the parent, because from a data perspective, it would be nice for us to see all the trends that we have observed continue. And we would, I think, encourage. But right now, even if someone is a close contact, if they choose not to get a test, that's okay, but then they have to wait 14 days instead of 7. But we never mandate that someone gets a shot or gets a test.
Are you seeing a lot of students staying out the 14 days, or are they getting?
No, that's the thing. They all, particularly because it's free, and if you go to the right spot, if you go to our website, we are seeing students anxious to get back, getting the test on the 7th day, and then usually it's quick enough turnaround to get, excuse me, on the 5th day. And usually it's quick enough turnaround to get them back on the 7th. Sometimes it spills over as the test is delayed, and everyone who's testing is coming back negative.
Speaking of coming back, are we getting more students back to the building that we're choosing virtual in the beginning?
In dribs and drabs. We have them in dribs and drabs, not large numbers, but I think we had 2 just this week come back, but we still have far too many out in the.
But did you do a survey recently? Did you do it?
Well, doing back from cyber charter or back from?
Back from being virtual as opposed to coming back. I thought you were doing some.
We
survey.
did, and I think Dr. Vitale can talk about that, and that goes to, and if we could actually hold off on that until we get to the fall planning section,
Okay.
because that is a very good question about, we were saying last month or last 2 weeks ago, maybe we have 500. Well, as Dr. Vitale has been investigating this, I won't speak for her for sure.
Okay.
Our sense is that number is going to be lower. We still don't know exactly what it is, and that might have some implications for our discussions when we get to the next topic.
So you're looking for direction on your modified.
Yeah,
quarantine. Is it something we have to vote on, or you're just looking to see if there's any objections?
Well,
or?
what I would say is, I think if the majority of the board is not in favor of it, well, then it's dropped on the spot, right? But if people are supportive of the idea, then we would transition, all right, getting word out, and we have to readjust our practices.
I wanted to make a comment or ask a question. Given the timing of this, I was wondering what your thoughts were, if you were concerned about implementing this, considering what members of the senior class may be planning outside of the district proms, other gatherings, when they are 2 weeks out, what that might look like, and if the timing was of concern.
And the timing is of concern, but I will say this, and I hope people listen, right? Right on this, Mr. Secretary, your question is a great one, all right? But if we see, all right, in order to qualify for modified quarantine, the students have to be free of high exposure, which includes being at the household or being at a spreading event, such as the party that took place some time ago, or any other type of event where if we see mass numbers of students who are coming down with it because of participation in the event, we would hope that administration would have the authority to say, you've been at a mass spreading event because of the frequency of COVID spread and the danger of having multiple COVID cases in our building simultaneously, which would be bad for sure, then we would exclude you from being able to participate in modified quarantine.
But we have to rely on people to be upfront with us about what spreading events they may or may be.
And that is true. And that is true. And we've been decent, I think, at gleaning that information, but we have been far from foolproof in our efforts. So it's a very good point that you raise. And if we again see that individuals are becoming positive, and if there are concerns, we can always go back to the, but what I not want to see is, some type of, an athletic event or something in school where an individual gets, or siblings end up testing positive, and then all of a sudden we have 25 seniors quarantined, because if quarantine is quarantine, and if that's on graduation, it's not like quarantine with an exception. And so I think that we are in good shape as far as the data. We're in good shape as far as emerging ideas. We are very concerned about things that could have a mass spread event or effect. We're less concerned this week than last because of the mini vaccine. We'll be less concerned next week than this week because we do think many of our older students are getting vaccinated. But I think we would be prepared to say that we would go back in a second to a more rigid quarantine posture if we saw that was necessary.
How are the requirements under modified?
Like,
How are the requirements under modified quarantine different than not under
Well,
modified?
Mr. Fleming, under the current situation, if we learn that someone is positive, so there's a positive case, our entire administration immediately jumps to find they pull the seating charts in the classroom, they pull the seating charts on the buses, They look to see who's on what sports teams, and right away, the principal comes walking in, and our kids now know, uh-oh, who's going to be quarantined, right? And the students are taken immediately out of class or off the field and sent home and told that you have to isolate or quarantine yourself and have a test after 5 days. And then if it's negative, as it has been, then you can come back on day 7 as of late. Whereas for modified quarantine, you would have to wear a mask at all time. You would have to stay out 6 feet all time. You'd be a little separated more at lunch, but you would actually be able to come to school.
I guess my concern is if there's 80 students that are out now
Right.
on quarantine,
Right.
that means you have to monitor 80 students in the schools.
Right.
And
we would.
How do you do that? 80 students, that's a lot of people.
Well, we're monitoring them now at home. Like they have to turn in their test. They have to,
No, I mean, physically monitor it, make sure that they are 6 feet, that they're doing things different than the other students because they're
Well,
on modified quarantine.
right. And we have found, and it's a very good question, we have found extremely high levels of cooperation with our students in all aspects of what we have been doing. And so, we would give them the guidelines, we would ask for compliance, we would observe. Now, we wouldn't observe every minute of every day that they're there. And to the extent that we observed violations, then we would take action from a remind to say this is what happens to be the case. Or if someone was truly just not following the directions, we would send them into regular quarantine.
Right. I
And-
just
yeah.
find it difficult to understand or, understand how they're going to be differentiated from
Right.
the other students.
And what I will say is that we have heard reports of students, if we quarantine students in mass, we've heard reports of them going to local restaurants and tailgating, right, after they leave the building. And so what I would say is that the transmission of COVID in our buildings, I don't think should be measured against a zero standard, but rather measured against the transmission of COVID in the community. And at every turn, even if we say we don't accept that no COVID transmission takes place in the building, it is very safe to say that the level of transmission in the building is less than the level of transmission in the community. And therefore, the argument can be made, we are doing more damage than good in sending our students into the community as opposed to keeping them in school for that period. But your point about rigid monitoring, we can rigidly monitor someone and say they're not in the building, right? That's pretty easy. But to make sure that every second of every day they're complying, we won't have that level of supervision, but we have confidence that our kids are very good about, and they want to be in school. I think they recognize that, if I don't follow the rules, I will surely be asked to go home.
There has to be many concerns and questions that parents have when their students are being asked to quarantine.
Mhm.
Is there a point person to field phone calls in every building so that parents could get their questions answered?
Yes. Our administrative team, if your child is quarantined, you want a student back at school and you have questions, right? And it's an emotional thing, right? And our administrators have been doing remarkable work in trying to be compassionate and answer countless calls and countless conversations. In fact, it's really what we're doing now. And emotions are high and it's a hard thing. And so each and every administrator has been doing just that. And our main point person on this is our Director of Human Resources, Megan Buck, who flawlessly is coordinating the whole thing, herself reaching out to parents, researching, scrupulously monitoring and keeping records and connections of who's a contact to whom and who got it back and forth, spreadsheets everywhere, right? And so we have a good thing in place going on, but we think, and for a while, as I said last week, we were convinced that we were keeping COVID out of the building. Look, we're quarantining all these people, we see no COVID. So therefore, we must be keeping it out because we're quarantined. But then when no one comes down with it, right, it really was having no effect, you know, and so that's when it kind of thought, we're learning, is what I'm saying. We're learning now. And we've learned a lot along the way, and we've adjusted. And so I think this is a very reasonable next step. And I think that it won't be long before the CDC is suggesting that people do this. Because again, they've been very, very cautious, we know, in how they've approached it. So to your question, Mr. Pashowski, if there's not a sentiment not to do this, right, then I would leave here people saying, yeah, I might give this a try, see how it goes. I'll see where we have to adjust our plan, and if I have to bring it back to the board at our next meeting in 2 weeks, I can do that. But essentially, I'm wondering if the board would consider this challenging question in allowing administration to move to modified quarantine as it's described in this slide.
I don't know if we take a straw vote tonight, but would it make sense just to go around the room to get a sense of what the board feels?
Sure, I was gonna ask Jean if she's on the phone. Jean, can you hear?
Yeah.
Do you have any comments?
I mean, I understand people in school can be more closely monitored. I think I still have a big concern when being determined as high exposure. I think my list of high exposure would be a bit more inclusive. And so that's where I still have trouble.
So Dr. Main, can you
Exposure would be, you know, just indicating where the mask keep down and, you know, they're touching all over. And if that's not considered a high exposure, then why you get it?
Can you just, what are considered the high exposure? So,
Right now, we would say in a household where there's multiple cases.
well, how about just one case?
Well, right. So in a household where you're close contact and one of your siblings has it,
Okay,
unless there's ample evidence, like you stay at a relative's house or something like that.
okay.
But in large part, if you're in a home where there is COVID present, we would like you to stay out. And that's actually going to be a longer time because you have to wait for
Right.
the person and then on there. You know, as far as sporting events, you know, and touching balls, we do not think, from what we've been reading, that COVID is something that spreads on surfaces, right? So we've really kind of discounted that very heavily.
But if a
And-
student athlete
Yeah.
tests positive,
Right.
I would think that if they had a sporting event the night before, that would be considered a high exposure event, and that team should be quarantined.
And again, that wasn't in my thought process.
I mean,
here.
that, to me, when you talk about what a high spreading event is.
Right.
To me, a sporting event is a high spreading event. You're
Right.
respirating, you're
I would think that a gym class in the
in a gym
building
class as
would
well.
be a
a high
higher exposure than
We have to think about gym
outside
class.
physical
Right,
activity.
and I also would think that would, so I would like to hear exactly like what are your high exposures, and
Right.
if those lists are inclusive enough to Jean's point.
Right.
I would be supportive of the modified quarantine. I don't think that we need to have 80 students out of the building.
Right,
I think that's too many,
right.
but I think there might be somewhere in between where some of the higher exposure, maybe we need to make sure that we're capturing the true
And that's
high
fair.
exposure.
That is fair. And so I would say that regarding sports, and we can kind of work through this, but there would be a difference, say, between indoor volleyball and outdoor lacrosse, right? Or outdoor track, right? Because in those sports, first of all, it's outdoors, right? And yes, there are moments when we are in close contact, right? But those moments are short in time. And again, going back to the idea of cumulative exposure time, right? That actual contact time is low in our sports.
But if you're
right?
in the locker room and you're
Now,
on the
locker
bus,
room
I
and
mean, so
those-
even if it's an
right.
outdoor event, but you start out in the locker room, you get there on a bus.
Right. We think if if we continue to quarantine on buses, our numbers of quarantine kids are going to be very high. We quarantine a lot of kids on buses, lots of them, because they're pretty close. Some of our bus routes, the buses are full. And so, and we've not seen kids transmitting this on buses. The windows are down now to a point. Kids always wear masks on school buses. And so we think they're good on buses, right? Now, like if we were to have an indoor volleyball, and even that's a big room, right? So the volume of the room is meaningful, I think, in this, right? But if certainly with a party, right, where kids are in close proximity, not wearing masks, some would be vaping, right, where all that's where it's going to spread, right? But if kids, we think, are wearing masks, yes, in close contact at some points, but also certainly outside, we think we're good there. We really do think we're good there.
Dr. Mann, do you think there'll be any blowback from parents who are very sensitive to?
Well, yes, two thoughts. It is possible that some people will think we're being too permissive. What I can tell you now, right, there is a hurricane of blowback against our current policy of quarantining. A hurricane of blowback against it, saying that there is no reason for my son or my daughter to be out of school, and forceful blowback against our current process. Now, we don't really care about blowback because we think we're doing the right thing, right? And so it is conceivable that there would be blowback to say, it's a concern, but my sense is that this would be far more positively received than negatively received. At the end of the day, we also think it is the right thing to do with respect to student safety, albeit not what the CDC is currently recommending us to do.
Okay, I think maybe we should go around the room. Warren, do you have any comments or concerns?
I basically favor that we should try this, because I think that the damage for students being out of school is high. And I also think that the district's gotten pretty good at being able to institute quarantines. And if, in fact, we start to see cases go up, I think it's very easy to pivot and go back to where we were.
I'm in favor.
Okay.
I'm definitely in favor of it.
I'm definitely in favor, and I would just ask, because we're all talking about cases where we may want more requirements. What if the student is vaccinated? I mean, we've seen vaccinations prove to be extremely effective. I think it's 1 in 15,000. So do these even apply if you're vaccinated?
They do not, Mr. Robeson. That is, in that case, to get out of quarantine, we do ask you to provide proof of vaccination, at which time you are not quarantined.
And the minimum requirements do not apply.
There are no minimum requirements. You have to show the card. That's the thing.
Of course,
But short of that,
assuming it's confirmed.
it confirmed that you have no problems.
All right, very good. Because I've seen kids hurt because they were out of class for extended period of times, multiple times for no reason.
Yeah.
So I'm fully supportive of the modified quarantine.
I support it because I know if something happens, we can always go back to what we were doing. So the data is pointing towards, let's try something different.
I also am in favor. The kids, as you had said, I believe being in the classroom is the best place for them to be, so I'm in favor also.
I'm in favor also with the understanding that if there are issues, the district is more prepared to go back to quarantine.
I mean, I agree. I just want, and I totally agree with Mr. Robeson that the vaccinated student, that's your get out of jail free card right out of the game. But I just want to make sure that we carefully define the exposure that we're talking about, making sure that we're using good guidelines. That's all.
And just to be clear, so when I say vaccinated, second vaccination shot, 14 days.
Right,
Absolutely,
right,
yes.
fully
Yep.
vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated.
And, oh,
What's
and
that?
Jean. Jean, did you want to have any further comments?
I would support in the regular classroom, a modified quarantine for anybody identified as a close test the regular classroom setting. But I do have a problem with the high exposure list.
Dr. Mann, I had one question on the topic of when children are vaccinated, and it sounds like more children are going to be vaccinated in the not too distant future. I know that we're not following CDC guidelines on many fronts. We've been ahead of them on several things, but if the CDC is saying that you don't have to wear masks outdoors anymore, which is my understanding, is there any way to, I don't know how you would monitor which kids are vaccinated and allow which kids to not wear masks when they're outdoors, but
Right.
I can tell you that in the kids, one of the biggest concerns I have, and as everybody knows, I have kids in the district that are younger, is that the social development that has been lost through this simple interaction during recess and in the halls. And I'm not talking about taking off masks in the halls, but
Right.
anything we can get for these kids to interact in a more normal way. I'd like to try to do it, but I understand the challenge of saying, well, who's vaccinated?
Well, and that's the thing too. We have to look better at the governor's guidance and the implications that it offers. Right now, as I understand it, we are still strictly under the requirements of the attestation regarding mask wearing. I think our very first conversation when that is lifted is about outside activity, right? However, the MIT study that I'm citing is crystal clear of the value of masks in the classroom setting in increasing the cumulative exposure time. So if I'm going to be consistent in saying, hey, what we read is important, I am more in favor of masks in the classroom now. And even they cite cloth masks, right, as being effective.
But if you're fully vaccinated.
Well, fully
Yeah, that was
right.
my only point is for the fully
Right,
vaccinated.
Right, so, but I think it does come down to a kind of a management thing, because the young kids are not going to be vaccinated.
But
And
they might get approval over
and
the
that might
summer.
improve too. So that's a question for future discussion. In light of what we've reading and the potential efficacy of masks in the classroom regarding cumulative exposure time with respect to the MIT study, I am not at all prepared to move off that.
No,
So
absolutely not.
let's get the attestation out of the way, which is not our job, somebody else's. Let's get kids outside, being kids outside, right? And then we'll work our way back into the classroom. But I think the classroom is really going to be the last stand, because again, we still do have medically fragile children around, and there are
One step
indications
at a
masks
time.
in classrooms are still very good things. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. And again, boards in the past didn't have to do this kind of stuff, right? So thank you for this, but a couple more things here, right? So planning for the fall of 2021, we're back to this. So enrollment in all virtual instruction is our most difficult question. We established that last time, right? The fewest possible number of students should be enrolled in virtual instruction. We need to shout from the rooftops, come back to school. This is where you need to be. It's where we want to have you, right? And so Dr. Vitale is spearheading an effort to reach out to our families who are in all virtual to identify what concerns they have, and then to address those concerns and say, it is okay for you to come back. And if you think it's not, how can we help in this, right? And great progress has been made on that, right? And there do appear to be positive developments regarding the pandemic. Vaccinations are up among our students, clearly, those who are eligible for them. Vaccines are being authorized for younger students, and just a day or two ago, restrictions are easing across Pennsylvania. Right? So, Dr. Vitale, do you want to take just a second and tell us about your efforts and how we're going to reach out to families who are all virtual and maybe some of our plans?
Absolutely. So first, by the end of the week, we're going to send out some sort of public literature that addresses our safety measures and what we're doing to keep children safe. Then next week, every building principal is going to have almost like a Google Meet that's open to any families that are virtual to address in person what's going on. At the end of next week, we're going to send out a survey to all of our families, asking them if we had 3 different options, which they would choose and why. And then from there, we'll start to reach out to individual families to address those concerns. But I think we first need to explain what we're thinking and what we're doing now, and that our students are safe in school. Then we need to hear from our families what the concerns are and then address those concerns. And I believe that the survey will then yield better numbers for us of what we're going to look like in the fall, because I believe the current numbers are not going to be an accurate representation of what we're looking at.
If you notice, these slides look a little better. They are Dr. Vitale's slides, not mine. So we always cite our sources in education, right? So, you know, you could see just how this has trended. Blue being virtual, the orange being hybrid. And of course, we had no in-person along the way. So you see the numbers are small, but they're still big number, like 150 kids that's our problem, right? Even though it's a small percent, we have lots of kids, it's a big number.
And they seem consistent.
And it seems pretty consistent, right?
But
Now,
does this
is there
virtual
any-
include Abington virtual as well as the charter, cyber charter? It does not include the cyber charter.
What is a little confusing is that you have hybrid and in-person in one. Aren't there families out there that still want the option of hybrid?
So I have that in one because in the fall block, we had a hybrid model. And then moving forward, starting on March 8th, we did not have a hybrid model. So that orange is hybrid for the first column, and then everything after that is in person.
So my question is though, are there families out there that are going virtual now because hybrid is no longer?
That's a good question to ask. We could add that to our survey. I do not know that answer.
I think that might be worth asking.
But if you look at the data, those numbers didn't increase. If those hybrid went into virtual, those numbers didn't increase week of April 5th and May. They're still around the 185 mark. So it doesn't look like anybody went into it. So we need to confirm.
So I would just be curious to know how many of the cyber charter, what we started in the fall of cyber, did that stay consistent for the whole year? Once they went to cyber, they never moved. We had nobody leave cyber.
Pretty stable.
Okay. So once, and those people chose the cyber charter, even though they may not have been cyber charter the year before, right? That number increased significantly.
Yes, it did double.
It doubled. And then it stayed, it held. Pretty much. Okay, because that's our audience as well, correct? We've got to get, okay.
They might be a little more sticky than all virtual ones who are remained our students. But yes, we want everyone back because it's the right, it's.
Right.
I do think there are many families that chose to go cyber this year because they did not like the Abington virtual option last spring. And they didn't really know how good it was going to be. And then I was suspect, and I've talked to some that they made a decision for the school year. And, you know, I don't know that you're going to get all those kids back, but I would be surprised if we didn't get many of those kids back.
And Mr. Azar, what we've seen too is that families now are saying, look, we love our virtual teacher, the Abington Heights virtual teacher. It's really great. Like, we'll be back next year, right? But just not right now because why would we change? Things are going well. And so, and that makes perfect sense, right? Perfect sense. But that was really not reflected in our conversation 2 weeks ago when we're looking at some pretty big numbers, right? So again, we think things are heading in the right direction here, which still we have hard decisions, but yes.
So going back to the cyber charter, do we have any students that went cyber charter and then enrolled back in person?
Yes.
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
We do for sure. Now, I wish it was 100, right? It's more like 5 or 10. Right? And we need to get more. We need to start making the case that kids belong with us. So,
And do you know if they did that because they had the option of going in full-time 5 days, or is it, they realized it was, and I know you can't make generalizations,
yeah.
but a sense of, at least anecdotally, because of the quality or the accessibility or the interactions, or,
I think we saw a little blip when we went back 5 days. A couple people said, few families said, yep, that's what we've been waiting for. Let's jump. Right. And so, but there are many reasons that people are in cyber charter. And we have to unwind that as best we can, and knowing that they're very good at marketing and they are very good at keeping their kids because they have resources that we don't.
Do we have plans to segregate the results from our virtual students versus the in-school and versus the cyber charter? Give us some measure how well we're doing virtually versus the peer groups.
You mean test scores?
Yes.
Oh, I think we could track. I think we surely could track. That's a good point. So, we don't really have much on what's happening in the cyber charters. We have aggregate data, but for our own students in and out, we'll be able to track that information.
I think if we're going to go forward with what we talked about at the last meeting,
Right.
being able to have numbers that show the test results for our virtual platform, as
Right.
rudimentary as it is now,
Mhm.
would be a huge marketing benefit
Right.
to go against
Right.
the cyber charters. And I think any test scores we have will be.
I think we talked about that at the last public meeting.
Yeah, we did.
We did, but we didn't talk about developing data on how well we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically, I asked a question about wit and wisdom. And how is wit and wisdom, how does it fare virtual versus in person, knowing that it's not built for virtual learning?
Right. And so I think, now I think better understand your question, Mr. Fleming, that you were saying, we'll test the kids who are virtual and test the kids who are in person and see if there are differences.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, and we will. Now, we are not testing until the fall. And so, and Wit and Wisdom is only a year old essentially now. So we'll have some data in the fall, but our next meaningful test will be this time next year. We hope next, I mean, obviously we do benchmarks, internal testing, but our next major state assessment, the PSSAs. What happens in the fall? I have no idea what's going to happen in the fall. It's not, I don't think, a really great measure of what's happening. But next spring, we'll be doing the PSSAs, and those data will tell us a lot. as far as how
And I
we're
think
Yeah,
when
but
we
that-
do those, we must make sure to segregate the students that are virtual so that we can trap that
doing.
data.
I agree completely.
But that day will be done too late then. if
Yeah,
gonna
we're
be
looking in
making
the
a
rearview
decision
mirror at that
for-
Right.
yeah.
We may be, but then it gives us data on how well we did and what we may need to do in the future if we're going
Right.
to continue it.
I'm anticipating our scores in the fall to be low. I am. Not least of which is because summer goes by and there's lots of learning over the summer. And I am anticipating our scores to be very, very high a year from now. That is my sincere hope, and I believe it will be the case.
Dr. Vitale, when do you think you'll have the results of your analysis in the survey?
I hope to have it within 2 weeks.
So maybe at the next
So our next meeting,
public meeting?
Yes, so our next board meeting, I hope to have a better number of what we could anticipate in the fall for enrollment.
Have you started this summer organization of offering summer programs for the families?
Yes, we have. We currently have 80 students. As Mr. Driscoll, we want more, but we are able to manage 80 students right now in the middle school program. And we are marshaling up for summer school. ESY is already all set. We have some special programs coming up for special education students for after-school tutoring, sometimes a day, 2, 4, whatever, it's based upon some of the things we've identified in the conversations. And we have a credit recovery course in person, and we're trying to arrange one virtual also for our high school kids. And we'll have a regular summer school for our elementary, in addition to the extended school year summer school that we run every year, which will be enhanced this year.
So that's been all communicated with the throughout the district, throughout the families, and they've already signed up?
Well, we're trying to get the staff together. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but we're well into the planning process.
Okay, thank you.
So right now, we're identifying the students that will be in need of these programs, and then they will be invited, and we're working out the logistics of transportation. We're going to offer food during that time as well to make sure that we're feeding our families. So we're working out all the logistics, and families should be notified shortly.
So will it be on all the buildings?
For logistical purposes, we're probably going to run the elementary one at Clark Summit, and all 4 buildings will go to Clark Summit.
And we have enough teachers for all of it? Great.
That's good. That
So
was,
it looks to me like we increased the total number of students from the fall up to March. So it looks like we must have gotten a handful back from the cyber, right?
yeah,
Because
and people come and people go. That's the other thing too. Like
Of
from other
moving.
places, like
Oh,
from
okay.
migration.
Okay,
is
so it's
an
not
issue.
just a,
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's hard to put your finger on. I mean, we have every
Yeah.
kid accounted for, but a lot of people are coming from other places now. and
Right.
Wanting to come here, and some of our students, they move, whatever,
right,
they're in and they're out.
right.
So, and then this is what it looks like from a percentage standpoint, and I'll just run through these very quickly, because they're not my slides, I'm teasing, right? The middle school, and then the percents, and then the high school, which is where we have our largest numbers of kids, right, we're out. And we have to talk about that, about developing some incentives to get them back and to why they might be out. So there's the percent of high school. So here we are, right? In our discussions, and I'm going to run through this, but this is important information as the board considers the finances of this, right? I know Mr. Acker, when we were talking about per pupil expenditures, said, that's fine in general, but what about instruction? What about being a little more granular in reporting per pupil expenditures, right? And I think Mr. Robeson was talking about, what does this look like in context? How is this going to work over time, right? What are our plans if we're hiring people, and are we bringing it down or bringing it up? What are our needs, right? And so I actually thought a lot about those 2 questions, an awful lot, because they're so very relevant to where we are as we look forward to making some adjustments, right? And what I will tell you is I think we could be proud of where we are, but I also think where we are may not be exactly where we need to be. So let me throw some things up, right? So we broke per pupil expenditures down into 3 categories, right? Instruction, administration, and all, the whole big thing, right? And over the last 10 years in instruction, the state average of instruction, take all the schools together and the average about their changes in instructional expenditures, they've gone up 37% in 10-year period. Abington Heights has gone up 23% over that time. Now, instruction is where rubber hits the road. So we really want to be spending money in instruction. That's where we want it to go, right? So like, we're not claiming, oh, we didn't spend on instruction, that's a great thing, but we controlled our costs reasonably in instruction. Under administration, all right, we've always said we are tight, and we make it tight, and it is tight, right? Across the state, 30% increase over 10 years in administrative cost. Ours has gone up 5% over that time.
So Dr. Mann, this
Yeah.
is per pupil?
This is per
So
pupil
that
expense.
is it-
Well, it's growth. We get per pupil in the next couple slides,
Okay, so this.
but this is
total.
overall growth in those account
Okay,
categories.
Because we know that in instruction, we've reduced our number of teachers by a significant amount because our enrollment was down.
Right, and
So
we
that-
normalize it in the per pupil,
Yeah,
in the per
okay,
pupil thing,
that
right?
makes more
And
sense.
and if you were to convert this to compare Abington Heights to the state average, if we were to move up to the state average, again, this is a per pupil basis, right? We move up to state average, we have to increase our budget $6.7 million to get to the average in instruction, $1.2 million in administration, but it's a small category, and then all over 17.4 if we were to spend at the state average. So let me show you where I get this, right? These are actual per pupil expenditures, right? In all categories. You see, I got this off this
And I want per pupil on instruction. We have
We
that.
we do, coming up, right?
Okay.
So like this is the, I have the three categories. I have it three categories. So here it is. Back in 2010, Abington Heights spent $12,561 total per student based upon these categories. The state spent $13,533 in the broadest measure, right? Over the course of the decade, right? That you could see those lines diverge, right? And in the end, the states, I think that's, was that 21 something, and Abington Heights is at 16, right? And if you look at this distance today, if we had kept up with the average, we'd have to add about $17 million to our budget. Now, going to instruction, here we have instruction, right? And again, this is a subcategory of the prior slide, right? And so back in 2010, we were spending about 71.25, and the state average was spending 78, right? And then again, little fluctuations are just budgetary artifacts, and whenever something happens one year or the next. But you could see that those numbers are diverging, right? And that we are spending less overtime than averages. Yes.
Where does that put us in terms of rank within the state on instructional cost per pupil?
I don't have the per pupil in instruction. Generally, we are 486 out of 500. But we're higher than that on instruction.
That's exactly my point. I'm
Yes.
just wondering where that number is.
Yes, and I don't know, but I'll see if I can find it. I think I probably could. But we're much higher than 486 in instruction.
That's exactly, again, the point. I think that the efforts we've had have really come at the expense of administration and overhead costs
Correct.
within the facilities.
Very true, very true, very true. And we're still behind by a bit, but not as behind. I mean, here, this is the most stark slide of all.
Because that state average includes a lot of school districts such as in inner cities, Philadelphia,
Yes,
where
right,
it's naturally higher.
right. Yep. Yeah, and that is true, a very important point. We need to spend less per pupil than the highest need district because we don't have those needs. Right, that's a very fair assessment, but by any measure, we still are below, right? Because these are averages here that we're talking about, and that includes the high flyers and the lowest of the low, right? Then on administration, this is the starkest slide of all, right? That we barely have moved over the last decade in per pupil expenditures and administration. The state has gone up by. Now, this is a very small component of a large budget, so it's not impactful, right? But it's still something that is worth noting. And then this is the general fund, which kind of gets the whole operational thing that we're putting aside certain, and we put in on this graph, just to conclude, the state average and also districts like us, socioeconomically similar districts. And there really is little difference between districts like us and the state average. But there's a great difference between those and where we are right now. We understand, right? And then the last slide I have in this context effort is student-teacher ratio, right? And that is, how many teachers do we have? How many teachers do we have per student, right? So over on this side, these are the numbers of students. So 15, for example, 15 kids per teacher, right? And you can see over time, right, as lines go up, that means there's more students per teacher, right? And so the average school district, the gray line, you see over time, districts are kind of staffing up a bit more, right? This surprised me. In the intermediate unit, right, there's more teachers per kid, higher levels of staffing by a decent amount than across the state. So our local schools are well staffed, and you could see over time that our numbers of teachers per students has been increasing, which contributes significantly to the instructional differences, because teacher salaries are the major component of our instructional costs, right? So this has been the issue. So that's kind of a context of where we are, right? And so that brings us to the next. Mr. Agar, 443 out of 500 when it comes to instructions per student. Thanks.
So we're still very much at the bottom half.
Way in the bottom half. Yes. Yep. And so this was a
It's
slide.
so interesting because of how high up we are in the performance, and it makes you wonder. Like, I don't know, it makes me wonder how inefficient other districts are. I think I'm pretty proud of how efficient our teachers
Yes,
must be doing an amazing job, our community's doing an amazing job.
they are.
I think if we look at us compared to other districts that you said like have high needs, I mean, many other districts have much more special education students than we do, which is significantly higher cost. I mean, there's so many factors that to draw, there's a lot of things you have to consider.
Right. Now, I would say we are being compared against the average here. I mean, we're not being compared against the high needs school. This is about the average. And yes, we're a little better than average with respect to our standing, but not all that. It's unquestionable, our staffing levels are low, right? By any comparative standard. Now, if we look internally, we could draw our own conclusions, and we've tried to get the absolute most out of every, we have people moving from building to building, and we, increase class sizes to a certain point. We manage it, but it's still very, very low with respect to any measure that we want to compare to, right? And being that low in 2018 is something easier to manage than being that low in 2021, right? And that's the point I'm making now, is that, I was the architect a lot of this, right? So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm the one who came and said, look, we got 2 people here, 3 people here, do this, do that. So I am not complaining about this. I'm saying, look, this is good, but the circumstances have changed right now. And so let's look at maybe some of this other stuff that we're looking at, right? So going back to the looking forward, that's a look back, current circumstances, context. Now looking forward, right? Last month or last meeting, I said approximately 550 students, grades 5 to 12, we have to deal with here, right? I think it's less now. As we looked up, Dr. Vitale's done some work. It's going to be less than that. We don't know how much less, but that's too many for us to be planning for. Current staff instruct in person or virtual students simultaneously. That's minimal additional cost, high demand and strain on professionals. So that's what we're doing now, right? The current model in their middle school. This is the option that we looked at as far as doing it ourselves and hiring staff, right? Well, it's going to be less than 550 students, all right? The approximate 9 to 10 new professional staff members, even if students go down, it's still hard to reduce that number of staff because we need a certain amount of capacity to deliver this, right? We also have identified some additional needs as far as a principal, English teacher, and some support teachers who we need to get back to doing their role as support teacher rather than teaching in the classroom. We think with respect to virtual, this is the best option as far as quality. It is still a recurring and escalating expense. It is scalable, but over longer periods of time, right? Because attrition is not something that comes quickly, and that's the only way that we would scale this. And I would say that I've added since the last time, by adding staff, it would allow for more student opportunity in the future. We would build our capacity to do things that we're really struggling with now. I would just offer, for example, a new math teacher at our high school, right? Our computer electives, the computer science electives are just so popular, right? The person who teaches it is a math teacher who has other responsibilities beyond computer science, right? And so to the extent that that person has other responsibilities, if there's high demand, we're limited in what we can do in that one instance, right? We're limited in other areas where we have class sizes of 26, which is what we shoot for, right? And so that's part of the reason that we have such a low student-teacher ratio, high student-teacher ratio, is that we try to be efficient, but it does unmistakably come at a cost, right? And so if the board were to go in this direction, which I'm not saying it should, in the context of what we've looked at relative to other places, there are places to put those teachers for sure, right? We are not overstaffed by any measure, right? Oh, And so, what I would say right now is, I don't think tonight is the time to make a decision on this, because we need some more information, right? Part of me says, right, and I think Mr. Fleming was talking about this, like, let's just, everybody come back, right? Let's just shoot for and do everything we can to get everybody back, right? Yes, let's add some positions here and there because we need it. We do, right? And then if the numbers are small enough, as we hope they will be, then maybe we just use the virtual third-party option, as a countermeasure to just having no virtual option and forcing kids into cyber charge. Right? Now, if the numbers are higher, we have to kind of re-engage in this conversation. Our staff, our faculty, our principals are going full speed now in the hiring process. Now, we're not going to hire anybody, but we have to do it now because the board won't have an option to hire people unless we really identify some great ones. So
you're interviewing for the principal and the English and the elementary now?
yeah, that we, like, for Mr. Snyder to have a reasonable shot at running his schedules and electives, we need a high school person up there, right? With the elementary teachers that we have, we need to get our reading teachers back teaching reading as opposed to the classroom. These are things that just really must be done. I'm actually including the principal. We're hesitant about any more administrators, but Park Summit Elementary needs a full-time principal. I'm just convinced of that, right? And so that's add-on, but I don't think it's even controversial, some of those things that we're talking about, right? What's controversial is like 10 more teachers to run a virtual thing, right? Especially if we don't have the students that are there to do it. If we even want to, right? But like, it would be a really, and one of our principals, Dr. Thomas, said, I want this, but I want to devote our resources to the kids who are in school, right? And if we're really spending this money, let's make what we do in school so much better than have it diverted elsewhere, right? And again, I'm just suggesting, and the board may be supportive of this. Let's just hold off for another 2 weeks, see what the data come. We'll share it as it becomes available. Hopefully we'll have some really good news about encouraging kids to come back, vaccines, all that. And maybe we'll try to come to the best decision we can in 2 weeks. That's okay with the board.
Thought to doing a study for all day kindergarten?
My thought is,
What was the question?
We missed the
I
question.
couldn't hear.
yeah.
A thought of looking forward to all day kindergarten?
And that has come up a number of times. I think the timing for that would be, let's just allow us to get things set for the fall. And then perhaps very early in the fall, if the board is interested, we put out a request for proposals, because I think we would need a facility study for that. And then the people would come back and say, this is, because we did that once. And I have some numbers on staffing, but where we put the kids is the real problem, and the cost of it, right? So
I understand. I think it's nice to maybe think about that for the fall.
Yeah.
To look at a feasibility study.
let's say, let's make a note in August, right? That if the board wants to do it, we would put together an RFP that we issue very early once we get back in the fall, see who responds to help us out, and then we'll pick someone, and then kind of go from there, right?
Thank you.
All
Dr.
right.
Vitale, is your survey going to include the cyber charter students? The question for them, what would it do for them to come back to Abington's cyber option if there was one?
I wasn't planning on it. I'm almost thinking we should create a separate survey of why they are in cyber charter, and then would they be interested in coming back? But I do think we can do that within the next 2 weeks to get that information as
Okay,
well.
because I mean, that would be a lot of money. I mean, I think we could devote those resources to our option. I mean, I agree, if there's like 10 kids doing all virtual, you're gonna just contract with that. You're not gonna form our own for 10.
could I make a suggestion on the survey?
Yes.
So as I've been thinking through this issue, and I've thought about it pretty much nonstop for the last 2 weeks, because I think this is one of the biggest decisions that we could make, whether or not we're going to do that option 2 or that option 3. And it's a huge policy decision for the board. So what's really valuable to me to know from the parents is not just like, do you want A, B, or C? It's if we offer A or B, would you pick A or B? Or if we offer A or C? So what I mean is, I would like to ask each parent, if we only offer in-person or cyber, what are you going to do? And then if we offer in-person or Abington virtual, what are you going to do? That would be really valuable information for me. And then I'll divulge where I'm leaning on this issue, which is I have major concerns that Abington, look at the slide, the billboard slide. Like, I know we'll do it better. That's clear. But I have major concerns that we're creating and enabling an environment. And I've had many discussions with physicians and pediatricians who are generally concerned that we're going to create an environment where you're enabling an inferior educational experience. It's going to be better than cyber, but so, I mean, that's a whole separate discussion, whether the board has a view on that or not. But the data is really valuable if that survey could be crafted in a way. And I'm not saying everybody's going to be honest, but I would like to know of all those 550 parents, if you just say A, B, or C, I don't think you're going to get the right data.
Mhm.
Because I think the decision that we're making as a board is, are we going to do B or C? And I think that the parents have to, if I was a virtual parent, I would want to know, which one are you going to offer? Are you going to offer both, or is it going to be one or the other? Because that's going to change the way that I feel. Like if I'm a virtual parent, I very well may say, oh, I'm going to attend virtual, but if you don't offer it, I'm coming back. But if you don't craft that survey the right way, you're not going to get that data from the virtual
I would just
parents.
be careful. You don't want to lead them to the B answer.
No, absolutely not. You want to be very clear with, no, definitely not lead them to that answer. You want to be clear what you're asking though. I think,
Right.
you know,
And to your point about being clear about what we're asking, I know some of the surveys we sent out, people weren't quite clear what they were being asked. And again, how you just phrased that, I was confused.
Yeah.
So I mean,
right.
it's like, you gotta be confused.
You gotta be really
You
clear.
gotta get
Alright.
really
Yep.
specific of
Yeah.
each question
Yeah.
and does it make sense? So that's gonna be very careful on a survey.
Right.
I believe that most students who were physical before the pandemic are going to want to get back to physical as soon as possible. I think the students that, I would like to get the students who are attending cyber and were attending it prior to the pandemic and are going to continue. I would like to stop paying so much money at the cyber
Absolutely.
school and do a better job and give them a better educational opportunity than what the cyber charter is doing for them. I mean, I can't imagine that a parent is going to, who always had physical opportunity for school, is going to stay virtual once this pandemic is under control. I don't know. That's just my thought.
I like the idea of reaching out to the individual families and asking them
Yep, I agree
specifically
with
what
that, yeah.
what is your motivation. I think
Right.
that's a good approach.
Right.
Very good. And I think, Mr. Azar, we did exactly what you said in the second prom survey. Because we were very general in the first prom survey,
Yeah.
but then in the second prom, so we're refining our skills now.
Right.
And so I
Surveys
think that
are,
we'll probably be able to do a
Yeah.
similar effort, and it's a very, very good idea, because
Yep.
the second survey, when we were saying, if we have this, we'll come, but if we have that, we won't.
right.
And if we go to this or that, I won't go to that. That was actually helpful to us, and I think it is a good practice for this thing.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure we include our students that are at
Yeah.
the cyber
Yeah, and let's
charter.
do that. Let's do a separate thing for them, because the dynamic is different there,
Mhm.
right? They are being held more tightly than our own virtual students. So let's do that. And again, I'll write them. We've been writing them. And we've again had small effect, but not great effect in this. So if that's a plan, then that, we'll be back
Okay.
in 2 weeks,
That
right?
sounds good.
And then the last open issue, we just want to.
And Superintendent
Yes.
Mann, while we're in survey design detail,
Yes, yes. Yes.
to avoid anchoring or bias, is it possible, like what makes option A option A? Like, why do you pick option A to be the Abington Heights option. I'm not saying that's what it is, but
Mhm.
so I would recommend you just do a random thing when you make option A what it is, option B what it is, option C is Comet,
Yeah, move it
whatever it
around.
was.
That's what you see the blind pool surveys, right?
Yeah, because you could have anchoring and tell them that it's randomly generated, like it's not, I mean, but once you have A, that's A for the rest of the thing. But I would explain that it is random because you can actually anchor an answer.
I would only say if our technology allows, like I'm not sure that like we do Google Forms. Certainly if that's something that can be done, we can, but if we can't do that on our Google form.
Oh, not individual surveys, but whatever option A is, it's option A for all the surveys.
Oh,
But-
I get it.
but it's
So
not-
random.
Right,
It's a
right.
randomized.
Yeah, it has to be consistent
Okay,
across.
all right.
Yeah, I'm not saying within the, no. But what makes option A for the rest of the surveys?
That's
to
good.
everybody?
Yes, absolutely. I think you want to like randomize.
Dr.
Okay.
Vitale, I trust your judgment. I'm sure you'll come up with some great surveys.
She will. She will. no
Thank
doubt, No doubt. Okay, now we're getting to the end of the list, and I thank the board for its forbearance here. But just the last time we spoke, we have a $3.3 million bond at 2.1% interest. The fees, we just pay it off, like paying off the mortgage, right? It eliminates expenses of approximately $700,000. It reallocates is really the better word to look rather than eliminate. All right. We do have more adequate reserve. It is an appropriate use of reserves, right? Paying down a lower interest reserve to a higher interest bond. And prompt action is necessary to reallocate the expense in next year's budget if this is what we care to do. And the real savings, and this is something a point Mr. Azar correctly made, of course, that real savings is the elimination of the negative arbitrage, the difference between what we're earning now and what we're paying on that money. So if this is something, I know there was all kinds of different views on this. My sense is that it's worthwhile considering, but again, if it's something that the board would like to do, we can move forward with it, and if not, then we could just put it away for 6 months, a year, whatever.
Michael or Jim, is it 5 years left on this bond?
5 years, yes.
It is a decision that timing is critical,
Well,
other than for this year's budget.
it is not critical in that now every time every day that goes by with the ARP, we lose a little bit of money, but in the end, the net outcome is going to be if we really go into a deficit spending, we're spending that money anyway from the general fund. If we hit a deficit budget next year, which is possible, right? Rather than not paying the interest, we'll still pay the interest, but we'll cut into the principal in the general fund. So if we run a deficit next year, right, it'd be less likely for us to run a deficit if we could reallocate $700,000 in expense.
But we've just reduced our fund balance by
But-
$3 million.
And so exactly what I'm saying is we will have reduced our fund balance by whatever our deficit is, which is essentially what we're doing in paying it off, right? And then instead of paying a debt service,
Right.
We're
I mean, the
paying
only thing I
ourselves.
wanted to see was the plan, our facilities plan, and what's our next big project, and what we'll be spending the money on, because what I would not want to do is defease the bond and then turn around and say, okay, so now we need to float a bond, even if it's for 4 million. Now you've got bond expenses. I don't know what the interest rates are going to be at that point. So I was just hoping that we would have information on what our facility plan was going to be before we
right?
go ahead and do
And
that.
I would say that we have been faithfully knocking off things on the last slip, and we still have things to do. I will tell you, I think I mentioned this. We were going to do South Abington's roof this summer. We're not, because commodity prices are through the roof and labor is scarce. So the roof is not in bad case. It's not an emergency. So, and I think in the fall, we'll be getting a new facility, potentially a new facility study,
Right.
because we'll be looking at all-day kindergarten and those things. They take a while to unfold, right? And so Mr. Acker is the authority on this, so I'm gonna,
Keep talking.
yeah, so my thought is that, you know, if we do a facility study in the fall, we would want, number one, analysis of whether, if, and how we have all-day kindergarten. But since they're here, they should also update our facility study to see what major maintenance can be done. And that will probably take us to mid-year or so. And, you know, in the meantime, you know, part of, if the concern is that we need to build up the fund, we could allocate the $700,000 into capital reserve, right, and build it back up, but again, just to capture the
I
arbitrage,
just,
that's
I
all.
guess I just don't see the need to rush for it. That's all. I don't see that, but I don't, I mean, that's,
I also have reservations about this. A couple things. Number one, interest rates definitely are at an all-time low. I don't know if board members heard the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, talking this week about the fact that she's seeing maybe a need for rates to start coming up. I would really not want us to go through a facilities survey in the fall and find out we're going to need a major project of some sort and suddenly have to go out in the market and pay more for it. I just wonder whether that 1 year of perhaps paying from a budget standpoint makes sense to hold off on this until we really know what our needs are going to be, because I think debt at this level is something we may never see.
5%, I would be saying, oh my gosh, get rid of that fund. But it's like, it's, I don't know, what, you're the finance guy. What do you think?
I usually talk when I don't know what I'm talking about, but I know a lot about this stuff. So my issue, I don't have any problem with defeasing it actually in a vacuum, because it's not it's an attractive 2.1% interest rate, but it's amortizing in the next 5 years. So it's not like you're paying off a bond that's got a long maturity that's, you know. I actually think it's worth considering, because nobody knows where the capital markets, you know, when you issue a bond, it's completely subject to the interest rate markets. And I couldn't tell you where they're going to be next week, let alone in 3 months or 6 months or a year. And I can't imagine that there's not some capital needs, right? There's, you know, there's got to be some capital needs. And I would be an advocate of refinancing that bond instead of defeasing it. If we were just going to do defease or not defease, I would say let's defease it, because it's going to save us the cash flow and you're going to have to pay it off anyways. But I would be an advocate of considering issuing a bond right now, refinancing that bond, because you can take what's a 5-year bond right now and you can finance it out 30 years and our payment's not going to be 700,000, it's going to be tiny. And that's permanently refinancing that bond at today's rates.
Oh, that's, okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted. I didn't mean
Yeah,
to.
no, and then
But,
if you're gonna do that,
Warren and I have been talking about,
Yeah.
it's time to get some low interest money. So
I mean, you know, it's a
agree.
longer discussion, but
I agree that the interest rates are historically low and it's an opportunity. And if we have facility needs, and that's why I was kind of hoping that we would get some of that information sooner rather than later, so that we could do just that, to finance what we need to have.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how long, I mean, a facilities analysis, I can imagine, is a very long process, right? So
Well,
I'd like to see it too, but
it didn't, we have the bones of one, it's
Yeah.
updated, and we
Right.
need to get it updated. I don't know what does it take to actually get it. We've been talking about it. I think we could move on it.
I just wonder what the cost of waiting is. You know, it seems to me we don't know. I think, Mr. Azar, I think your idea is a very, very good one. My only thought though is if we want to do that, it would be great if we had some idea of what our need was going to be.
yeah, you don't want, I mean, and I've as
I
much
just
finance
wonder-
experience as I've had, I'd never done municipal bonds. I've done corporate bonds in my whole life. But so I don't know what the structures of the municipal bonds are, but I would be happy to.
Well,
Get
Ryan,
involved
look,
in it.
but first, and I will say, right, when we talk about taking a bond and extending its term and then reaping the benefit, that's a very dangerous model that a lot of other school districts and municipalities have used and have gotten in bad shape, right? And so we have always, in our refunding, when we have refunded bonds or defeased over time, we've always kept the term the same, right? And we have not kicked it down.
Right.
There's a lot, I mean, I don't know what there's a lot of terms for how you roll it into the future, but
Mhm.
that's a dangerous, and I will say, even though we don't have a specific plan updated, we have a plan that has been addressed year after year after year, and it is not identified, with the exception of a possible problem in the foundation at the middle school, right? Which is either gonna bear out or not, right? It has not identified, like, are we gonna build a building? No, unless it's a all-day kindergarten building, right? But I don't see us building a building, right? Our roofs and our HVAC plants, we've been keeping up with, right? You know, carpeting, doors, that kind of thing, sure. But each year, if we run a surplus, right, and take that surplus and put it into capital reserves, it builds up and allows us to do these types of things, right? But for us, however small and however favorable the market, to incur the interest rates cost that drives up our operational expenses, that does not come with a corresponding increase in our operational tax rate, right, is a very dangerous thing to do as we are approaching a deficit budget right now. And so we'd be increasing our operational costs, and before the board would ever think about pushing a bond forward and reaping the benefit and extending those payments into the future, it affects our bond profile. We've been working for a decade or over, pushing the bond profile back, right, and not extending it out. So that now, as we get past these, we've mitigated the need to increase local taxes by converting bond payments into essentially tax payments from our taxpayers by leveraging the money they've sent to us in our fund balance. This would be a huge departure from that process. I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do, but it would be a major departure. And I think we would have to be very cautious about matching up tax revenue with increases in bond profile debt payments over time in the context of a budget that's very, very tight and might well run a deficit next year, not this year, but next year.
I just see that $3 million. I hear people talk about our facilities are tired. You know, I don't, so I don't know what it would cost us. Maybe we're not building a new building, but, you know, do we need new lab equipment, painted, painting and.
Just the updating. Everything.
Updating.
So I want to make one more comment.
Yeah.
So, and I say this all the time, I'm new to the board, but I think I'm in touch with a lot of the people that are in the school right now. And there is a huge sentiment that is actually very accurate. And that relative to other school districts, you know, we're competing. Abington Heights, I moved back to the area. I grew up around here. My wife is from Abington and grew up here, but so we had a reason to move back here. But there are lots of families that decide to move to Abington, and they make the decision based on our greatness. And we're a fantastic school. We're the best school district in northeastern Pennsylvania. Our test scores are the highest. We're the highest ranked school. There's no doubt. My concern is that if we don't invest in the facilities, that we're not going to stay there in the next 30 or 40 years. And if we don't,
But I
and
think
I
it's
have
got to be a gradual,
I'd
you know,
like to
well
make a-
thought out
I'd like to
plan.
make a-
oh, absolutely, Scott.
It can't be just.
It's not in the back-
Spend $10 million.
No, absolutely not. Like, I wouldn't even vote for it. I wouldn't even begin to think about spending any of this money until I saw that feasibility study from somebody that knows what they're doing. But I think that it's
Right.
extremely worthwhile to
And what
look at.
okay, sorry.
to make a proposal. I think it's time for us as a district to look at other streams of revenue. And we've touched on this before. I think that we should work with the AEIO, who's a 501c3, and we should start an alumni campaign so we could focus on a capital project and raise funds through all of our alumni and start to get a different form of revenue from our tax dollars. So we could actually start to really raise some capital money for that specific project, whether we've identified some area that needs to be done, and we can tap into our alumni and do it through our AEIO. That's our mission. That's part of our, you know, that's what we do. We're a nonprofit.
I think we've talked about this, but the problem is, it's, resources. Who's going to do it? There's no
Well, we
administration.
would have to partner more
available.
with the district. We would have to work with the
We
district.
did hire someone.
We never hired someone as a team. The AEIO hired someone, and we don't have the funds to pay a person to, professional to do that. But if you look around, there's school districts that have already started this. I mean, and I'm not talking about the private schools.
Right,
They've been doing it for years and they do it really well. I'm talking about public schools. And, the competition is high. And I think it's time for us to make a little bit of a change in how we receive all of our funds.
And that is true. And let me.
I think if you're going to do that, you have to have something you're working towards. And I think, again, until we have
Right.
some idea of how the money's going to be spent, I do think there are some things in the known horizon that we can look to for that 3 million, using that $3 million, the roofs, the foundation, the sewer project. My guess is those three things
Sure.
alone
Sure.
are going
No,
to
and
add up
that's-
to more than
that's
$3 million. So again, I'm not certain we want to just jump at
Right.
defeasing the,
And
bond at this
I'm not,
time.
listen, I raise it to the board because I should, right? And a reasonable case could be made for defeasing, but a very excellent case is made for not. Let me offer this important thought, right, on the feasibility study. And members of the facility committee will remember this, right? And this is my fault because and Mr. Fleming has occasionally pointed out, like, can we spend anything on something nice? Remember, like, you would say, like, let's do something nice for a change.
We
instead
do
of
get pizza
necessary,
every month.
right?
That's nice.
Right, instead of a roof, right, that's ready to blow on. And the facility committee will remember that I cautioned them, anytime you do a facility study by an architect, there will be stuff in there that architects want to do because it's how they make money, right? And the facility study that came back, you will recall that I handed out, had red marks all over the place, right? No, right? And maybe this process can begin by looking at all the stuff that whoever had the red pen, all right, went through and said, no, it's not necessary by one person's definition of necessary.
I
that may
think
not be
that's been
fair.
done a number of years ago. I think a new one
Oh,
is.
and I'm saying in the
Yeah.
fall, we'll do it, but there may be some immediate ideas.
Do we have to wait till the fall?
But I think that the facilities committee should meet with Mr. Elliott, and Mr. Elliott should go through all of his facilities and give us a wish list of what, according to the need.
And there's a pretty good wish list on that facility study.
Right.
So let's say this, let me get the facility study out as it exists to everybody, so you have it, right? You can send out an RFP, and again, it's hard for us because right now we are very focused on trying to,
Right,
do
no, I
all this other
understand
stuff,
that, that's, but I'm
But-
just thinking of someone who could just hire someone just. to do it.
but so let's see if we get an RFP together, and maybe we could ask the facility committee to help us on this, right?
Yes.
And say, put together an RFP, we'll get it out to like the usual suspects. And then the facility committee can just interview the people that you would like. And, we'll participate too. I mean, obviously everyone's participating, right? And then pick somebody, right? And just have them start, but tell them that you have to be independent of this while administration is trying to get people back to school. Because
Right.
we really cannot,
Right.
we just can't,
Yeah,
right? And these facilities are intense as far as needing administration involved, because they need blueprints and information and tours and this and that, and meet with us and back and forth. So it's a labor, and I'm not saying we want to do it, right? It's music to my ears to say, let's make this place nicer. But I will tell you, we are tight on resources at this very moment to get it done. And again, we can get maybe the ball rolling on selecting somebody, but as far as the nuts and bolts, we need to get to like the end of September. All
And
right,
Superintendent Mann, so the one thing though is if we do that, if we could discuss more about our going in position. So for example, the things that I hear that we're talking about are more, and it's a sign of the times with the pandemic and everything, but more operational and tactical. And what I'm thinking is we should think larger and more visionary. Because imagine if we had a world-class high school or a world-class facility for middle school, we probably wouldn't be talking about why are there 500 people going to charter schools or not, or choosing virtual. So, and some of the issues that we're maybe putting Band-Aids on go away. So I just think we should think larger in terms of what we're trying to invest long-term in, because I haven't heard anything that is like a 10-year or more strategy.
And you will hear a 10-year or more strategy on curriculum. And you'll hear a 10-year or more strategy on our STEM efforts, right? And what I will say, there is a counter argument to that, right? In that, when it comes to athletics, you can look far and wide, and there'll be very few teams that ever come out, never bet against the Comets, but our facilities are not the best, right? When it comes to academics and performance and state championship, mock trial teams and all of that, our facilities may not bet, but we are in many respects, I'm not talking like we're great or anything, but like, if you look at all of our competition with all of their facilities, right, that they're not putting up the numbers that our kids and our teachers are doing. And so the question is a facility, what is the purpose of that facility? And again, robotics, right? Our teachers, to their enormous credit, took an empty shop bin out the back and converted it into a robotics lab, right? Wow. And we have the greatest robotics in the Northeast. So I don't always see a connection between the facility and the thing.
I
Well,
would
I
agree,
don't-
I would
I don't
agree
see-
with that. I mean, I think we have to have focus on our programs and our outcomes for
Right.
our students and our families.
Yeah.
So I think it goes hand in hand. There's no question, though, you also need to have the facilities that look great. I mean, there are a lot of buildings in northeastern Pennsylvania, when you look at them and they're very old and dated, and you walk inside and it's state of the art. And I can think of a lot of businesses that are that way.
Mhm.
And I think that's the type of thing I envision here.
What I was gonna say is kind of along the same lines. When I think of facilities, I don't just think something that benefits athletics. Like I think of science labs being
Right.
redone,
Mhm.
different situations. We've talked
Right.
about our labs for years now at the high school, that the science
Right.
labs
And
need
put
to
the
be
equipment
updated.
and
Yeah, so
the
that-
newest technology, the new.
Right, so I don't
Yeah.
equate facilities with athletics.
Right, nor do I. I mean,
Right.
I did mention a
Nor
couple
do I,
times,
nor do I.
but I will also say, if you're looking for an investment to make in the quality of this place, right? You don't need to look much farther than the graph about per pupil, teachers per student. All right, and if we really want to address some of the social, emotional, and academic needs, right? That would be step one in my estimation, before we get to some of the other things that are associated with it. Again, that's a lot to talk. We're doing great discussion. This is a great discussion. And I can tell you that I think that's all I have. That's all I have. So we've learned a lot. These have been hugely helpful to administration tonight. And I thank the board. That concludes my report. And we still have, I think, a public comment.
Yes, we do.
We'll get back to that.
Okay, at this time, if there's anyone from the public who would like to address the board, please raise your hand, and remember you'll have 3 minutes, and to state your name and your address. And Mr. Lavelle, are you, no, okay. Any hands raised?
Let's both look, so we're sure.
I know, because sometimes you could get overlooked. Okay. We don't have any action or discussion items.
We
is
do
that
not
correct?
this evening, Mr. Shaw.
Okay. Guess there's no need for another public comment. I don't think, anybody raise their hand in the meantime?
No.
Okay,
We're good. I think we're good.
okay. We have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, and remember, we have an executive session